Chapter Zoe, the whisper that stayed emotion-based. Hook, Dan Nup, Modal Trun, Viet Lại Phù Hợp. Rusty, La Chocon Num Sau Thang Tuổi. Sometimes the loudest cries for help are the ones you can't hear, not over the hum of laundry machines or the wind pressing against windows, or the sounds of your own thoughts trying to drown out the world. It was a Tuesday, just any Tuesday, in a quiet corner of Willow Creek, North Carolina, the kind of town where fences sag gently from years of weather and porch swings creak even when no one's in them. A 6-year-old boy stepped barefoot into a backyard dusted with early frost. His name was Jonah Parker, and he wasn't looking for anything, just wandering, the way children do when no one tells them not to. Jonah had wide green eyes that blinked slowly, as if each thought took time to cross his mind, and curls the color of chestnut bark. He didn't speak much, not because he couldn't, but because he liked listening more than talking. He listened to trees, to creaky hinges, to silence, especially silence. And that morning silence told him something was wrong. It came not as a scream or even a whimper, but a trembling kind of quiet, tucked behind an old shed, where ivy crept up the wood like shy fingers. A place his mother said not to go. But something pulled at him, gentle, invisible like a whisper pressed into the ribs. Jonah tiptoed through wet leaves. The shed door hung crooked, barely hanging on. He nudged it open with 2 fingers. There, curled into the smallest ball a body could become, was a dog. No, a puppy. A golden retriever, no more than 5 or 6 months old, small enough that his body still didn't quite match his oversized paws. His golden fur was dulled and matted, crusted with dirt and what looked like dried blood. His front legs folded in unnatural ways, as though they no longer remembered what standing felt like. But worst of all, his muzzle had been taped shut. Several layers of grim grey duct tape wrapped tight, smothering sound, smothering breath. His eyes wide and honey brown locked onto Jonah's. There was no barking, no growling, no thrashing, only pleading. Jonah's breath caught and his knees folded under him. He didn't touch the dog. Not yet. He just whispered, "I see you." And the puppy blinked, slowly, like Jonah had blinked earlier, as if to say, "I see you too." Jonah looked around. No leash, no bowl, no name tag. Just an old tarp pushed to one side, a cracked rake across the floor, and that tiny creature shivering in a puddle of silence and shadow. He leaned forward and placed his small hand, dirt-streaked and trembling, on the puppy's fur. It flinched, then leaned slightly into it. Jonah nodded. He stood. "I'll come back," he whispered. "I promise." And he ran. Not like a boy running from fear, but like someone running to something, because love doesn't always need words. Sometimes it needs silence, stillness, and small hands that carry promises bigger than the world. And heroes, sometimes they don't wear capes or ride into battle. Sometimes they come in the shape of a barefoot child and a whisper in a broken shed. Chapter 1. The Silence Behind the Shed. Willow Creek woke slowly that morning, as if the entire town had decided to pull its quilt a little tighter and stay in bed a while longer. The late autumn air clung to every surface with a thin coat of frost, and pine needles glistened like glass threads under a pale, grey sky. Birds chirped quietly, hesitantly, as if unsure whether the sun would truly bother showing up today. In a weathered two-story house at the edge of the woods, 6-year-old Jonah Parker pressed his nose to the kitchen window, his breath fogging the glass in a small oval. The world outside looked soft and grey, and the trees swayed gently like they were humming a lullaby, too low for human ears. He'd already finished his cereal and drawn 5 new pictures on the back of old receipts he found in the drawer. His mother, Anna Parker, stood at the sink, hair still damp from a rushed shower, trying to multitask between packing lunch and finding her work badge. She was 33, slim, with auburn hair that never did what she asked it to, and warm, hazel eyes that carried both kindness and a sort of quiet ache, the kind left behind by too many goodbyes. She worked at the town library and raised Jonah alone ever since her husband left 3 years ago. It wasn't a dramatic departure, just a door that stopped opening and footsteps that stopped coming home. Anna noticed the way Jonah lingered by the window, and before she could ask him what he was thinking, he had already opened the door and stepped outside, barefoot. "Jonah, shoes," she called, but her voice faded as he wandered into the backyard. He wasn't walking aimlessly. Not today. Jonah moved past the old swing set through the overgrown garden and toward the tilted shed. His mom always told him not to touch, but the whisper had come from there. Not a real whisper, just a feeling. Something small, something hurt. The shed stood like a wounded animal itself, slumped to one side, the wooden panels darkened by years of weather. Jonah approached, slowly placing each foot carefully between the damp leaves and patches of cold dirt. The closer he got, the heavier his chest felt. The door creaked as he pushed it open, the rusty hinge groaning like it resented being disturbed. And there, exactly as he'd found him yesterday, was the dog. A puppy. A small golden retriever curled so tightly into himself, it seemed impossible he could ever stretch out again. His fur, meant to be warm and golden, was dulled by dirt flecked with dried leaves and tangled in places where it had matted from blood or rain or both. His snout was still taped shut. His front legs, thin, too thin, were twisted at strange angles, like someone had tried to force them where they didn't belong. His breathing was shallow, almost unnoticeable, but his eyes opened when Jonah stepped inside. Honey-coloured, wide, trusting in the way only a baby can be, even after everything. Jonah knelt, slowly reached into the pocket of his jacket, and pulled out a piece of bread he'd saved from breakfast. "I brought you something," he whispered. The puppy didn't move, but his nose twitched, and Jonah took that as hope. Back at the house, Anna was about to call for him when he reappeared at the door. Hair-messy cheeks, flushed eyes, big with urgency. "Mum," he said, short of breath. "There's a dog in the shed. He's little. He's hurt bad. We have to help him." Anna paused. He wasn't a dramatic child. She'd learned that early. When Jonah said something hurt, it hurt. 10 minutes later, they were in the car, heading toward Willow Creek Animal Care, a modest clinic near Main Street, housed in a converted farmhouse with peeling blue paint and a crooked weather vane. The sign on the door said closed. Anna knocked anyway. Inside, Dr. Claire Morgan looked up from her desk, startled by the knock. Claire was 34, tall and lean, with ash blonde hair pinned messily at the back of her head, and eyes the colour of fading storms. She wore a lab coat that had seen better days, sleeves rolled up past her elbows, and a pen tucked behind her ear. Life had knocked the shine out of her some years ago, first through a failed marriage, then through a string of cities that never felt like home until she landed here again in the town she thought she'd left behind. She opened the door cautiously, only to be greeted by a woman with urgency in her voice and a boy whose eyes were practically vibrating with worry. "We found a puppy," Anna said. "He's hurt. Badly. Taped muzzle. Broken legs. Please." Claire didn't ask any more questions. She grabbed her emergency kit, slung on a coat, and followed them back to the car. They arrived at the house, and Claire followed Jonah to the shed. She paused when she saw the tiny form in the corner. Not just hurt, not just abandoned, destroyed. The puppy didn't growl, didn't bark. He just looked at her with those wide, unguarded eyes. Claire moved quickly, gently cutting the tape from his muzzle, sliding a towel beneath him and lifting his limp frame into her arms. He weighed next to nothing. "I need to get him stable," she said. "Now." Back at the clinic, Claire laid him on the exam table. His legs were worse than she thought, one broken clean, the other splintered. He had early signs of infection, dehydration. But he was alive. Barely. Jonah stood at the edge of the table, his fingers curling over the counter. "Will he die?" he asked. Claire looked at the puppy, then at the boy. "He might," she said gently, "but he has a chance. Because you found him." Jonah nodded once, solemnly. "I think his name is Rusty." Claire blinked. "Why Rusty?" "I don't know," Jonah said. "He just feels like a Rusty. Claire looked down at the battered pup, then back at the boy. And maybe it was the weariness in her bones, or maybe something in the room. Shifted, but she said, "All right, Rusty it is." She hooked up fluids, cleaned wounds, set temporary splints. Every so often, the puppy whimpered softly like a ghost, learning how to speak again. Jonah never left his side. And Rusty, small and broken and beautiful, never took his eyes off the boy. Chapter 2. The Whisper of Help. The next morning brought with it a hushed fog, settling low across Willow Creek like a veil. The trees stood still, their branches dipped in frost, and the air felt like it might shatter if someone dared speak too loudly. Inside the Willow Creek Animal Care Clinic, the world had become centered on one small thing: a golden retriever puppy named Rusty. He lay curled under a fleece blanket on the examination table, a 4 tubes gently tugging at his shaved foreleg eyes, barely open. He looked less like a creature recovering from violence and more like a child recovering from night terrors. His chest rose and fell in soft, irregular rhythm. His fur, now slightly cleaner, still clumped in places. One splint wrapped his front leg from paw to shoulder, while the other remained wrapped in gauze, soaked with antiseptic and care. 6-year-old Jonah sat beside him, elbows on the table, chin resting on his small fists, watching every twitch of Rusty's nose like it was holy. He hadn't said much since the night before. He didn't need to. He'd brought a small stuffed bear from home missing one ear and placed it gently beside Rusty sometime during the night. The puppy now slept with his chin resting on it. In the other room, Dr. Claire Morgan sipped coffee that had long since gone cold. Her lab coat wrinkled her bun, loosening. The fatigue in her bones had settled like old wallpaper, familiar but ugly. She flipped through the printed x-rays and test results from the night before. The leg break on Rusty's right was clean, but the left had shattered, and his dehydration and minor infection were no longer minor. Still, he had survived the night, which given his age and condition was a miracle in itself. Claire heard the door open softly behind her and turned to find Wade Ellis, the clinic's part-time veterinary technician, trudging in with his usual, slightly overwhelmed look. Tall and lanky, with shaggy brown hair, and an easy, awkward smile. Wade looked like someone who was constantly surprised by his own hands. He carried a box of medical supplies under one arm and a brown paper bag under the other. "Got breakfast," he said, holding out the bag. "There's one for the kid too." Toast, I think." Claire accepted it wordlessly, then nodded toward the table. "He made it," she said. Wade leaned over to glance at the sleeping puppy. "That's one tough little guy." "Too little," Claire said, her voice barely above a whisper. 5, maybe 6 months old. Still should be clumsy and carefree, not this. Wade didn't answer. Neither did Claire. An hour later, Anna arrived, dressed in her library work attire, a navy blue cardigan over a pale blouse and dark trousers. Her name tag clipped neatly at the chest. She looked tired, but focused, carrying a bag of Jonah's extra clothes and a plastic container of warm soup she'd packed from home. "I told the school," she said quietly to Claire. "I said he wouldn't be in." They understood. Claire gave a tight smile. "You've raised a good one." Anna shrugged. "He's always had a way of noticing things others don't." Out in the waiting room, the bell above the door jingled, and a new voice called out, brisk and unannounced. "Knock, knock." Claire and Anna turned to see May Holloway step inside her boots, thudding softly against the floor. May was in her 50s, wiry and sharp-eyed, with a grey braid that hung over one shoulder and a denim jacket covered in dog hair. She ran Willow Creek's animal shelter like a general ran a battalion, tough but fiercely loyal to her charges. "Heard you've got a case," May said, strolling in and stopping when she spotted Rusty. Her eyes narrowed. "Lord, have mercy." Claire briefed her, quickly explaining the duct tape, the fractures, the starvation. May sighed deeply, hands on hips. "Looks like someone meant for him not to be found, or not to survive." Claire nodded. Jonah found him. In a shed. Behind their house. May looked over at the boy, then back at the puppy. "Kid's got good ears," she muttered. The rest of the day passed in slow motion. Jonah stayed close, speaking softly to Rusty about things that didn't matter. His favourite crayon colour. A tree he wanted to climb. How the clouds looked like soup today. Claire allowed him the space, watching the interaction like something sacred was unfolding. By late afternoon, Jonah had dozed off in the chair beside the table, his hand still loosely touching the edge of Rusty's blanket. Rusty, in turn, had nudged his nose closer to Jonah's fingers. Claire stepped into the office to check the microchip again. The code came up, the same Mum 8392 HGR, registered to a man named Howard Granger. A name that scratched at the edges of her memory, like an old nail in soft wood. No phone number, no alternate contact, just an address. A rural property on the outskirts of town, long since marked as vacant. She made a call. 15 minutes later, May leaned against the doorframe, jaw clenched. "Howard Granger," she repeated. "That old wreck, he died in a trailer fire 5 years ago. Half the dogs he had didn't make it." Claire frowned. "You're sure? Positive? That man was a hoarder. Took in strays, but not out of kindness. Had no business owning animals. That pup might have come from there. Might have been born there." Claire looked through the window at Rusty, his chest rising softly beneath the blanket, his tiny ears twitching in sleep. How did he survive? 5 years, she asked. "He didn't," May replied. "He's just a baby, which means someone else took him after and hurt him." The silence that followed was louder than anything else said that day. The snow came suddenly that Friday morning, drifting down in quiet flurries that dusted the roofs of Willow Creek and softened every sharp edge of the world. Light bled gently through overcast skies, illuminating the little clinic on Maple Street like a sanctuary. Inside, everything slowed down. Footsteps. heartbeats, breath. Rusty blinked. It was the first time in 2 days his eyes had opened fully. Not just fluttered, not just stirred, but truly opened. The pup lay curled on a thick fleece blanket beside a heating pad, his small body wrapped in soft gauze and tiny leg splints that looked more like doll braces than medical equipment. His honey-coloured fur, though still stained in patches, had been gently combed out by Wade and Claire the night before. He looked like he was learning to exist again, one breath at a time. When his eyes found Jonah curled up in the chair beside him, with a juice box in one hand and a comic book in the other, the pup let out a sound. Not a bark, not even a whimper, just a faint, raspy hum in the back of his throat. Jonah dropped the comic and leaned in. "You're awake," he whispered, eyes glowing. "You stayed." Rusty gave a small wag of his tail, weak and slow, but unmistakable. Claire, who had just walked in with a tray of warm compresses, froze mid-step and smiled an expression so rare it startled even Wade when he saw it. "He's a tough little fella," Wade said later that afternoon while preparing antibiotics. "I mean, his legs are like noodles, but that's spirit, all fire." Wade was right. Rusty, though small and wobbly, had started attempting to sit upright. It took effort. His hind legs trembled under his own weight, and his front paws curled awkwardly from the splints. But he tried. And every time he failed, he looked at Jonah, as if asking, "Did I do okay?" Jonah always answered by whispering, "You're doing perfect." Later that day, the clinic had a visitor. The bell above the door jingled, and in walked a woman in her early 40s wearing a thick burgundy coat, a long plaid scarf and boots with salt stains at the edges. Her name was Jodie Flynn, the town's only full-time journalist. She had sharp eyes that missed nothing, and a notepad always tucked under her arm like a holstered weapon. Jodie had once covered political scandals in Raleigh, but moved back to Willow Creek after what she called too many lies and not enough soul. She took one look at Rusty and stilled. Claire explained what had happened carefully, leaving out some of the darker specifics for Jonah's sake. Jodie listened without interrupting, jotting down only what she needed. But the way her face softened when Rusty nosed Jonah's hand told Claire this wouldn't just be a news brief. By Sunday morning, the local paper hit doorsteps with the front page headline, "Small boy, smaller dog, big heart, a rescue that melted the town." The article spread faster than anyone expected. A picture showed Jonah with one hand on Rusty's head and the other holding his stuffed bear. Comments flooded in online. Donations started arriving at the clinic. People brought bags of puppy food, toys, blankets. One anonymous envelope had 5 crisp $100 bills and a note that read, "For the boy who listens." That afternoon, Claire received a phone call that made her stop mid-step. Dr. Alex Brenner, a respected orthopedic veterinary surgeon, was visiting the county the following week for a surgical tour. Claire had trained under him once years ago. She took a chance and emailed Rusty's case to his assistant. "I read the file," Brenner said on the call. That puppy's been through hell. I'll make room. He would arrive Tuesday. In the meantime, life inside the clinic shifted. Jonah started helping Wade refill water bowls and sort bandages. Anna brought lunch for everyone each day and often lingered after to talk with Claire. They shared quiet stories about parenting, heartbreak, second chances. Anna found herself laughing more than she had in years. One afternoon, Claire pulled an old veterinary ledger from the back closet. She remembered Wade saying that Howard Granger used to bring animals to the clinic before it changed owners. And there it was, dated April the 2nd, 2016, Golden Retriever pup, male, approx. 1 year, name, Rusty, microchip implanted. Claire stared at the name. Jonah hadn't guessed. Somehow he knew. When she told him, Jonah blinked slowly, then smiled. I think he told me. That night, Rusty tried to stand again. He managed to get both front legs under him and held for 3 seconds before gently falling into Jonah's lap. Instead of being scared, the pup licked the boy's chin. Jonah giggled, rubbing his nose into Rusty's fur. You're gonna run someday, he whispered. I'll race you. And the puppy wagged his tail. Not because he understood, but because he believed in the voice that stayed with him. Chapter 4, The Truth. Buried deep. The snow hadn't let up for days. It fell in slow, whispering waves, covering Willow Creek in a pale hush that made every street feel like a secret. The roads were slick, the trees frosted white, and the little animal clinic on Maple Street glowed like a lantern in the storm. Inside, the warmth was fragile, but real. Rusty had been moved to a larger pen, lined with thick blankets and soft toys, most of them donated by neighbors. A small Christmas tree sat on the counter, decorated with dog bones, tied in red ribbon, and paper stars made by local school children. The air smelled faintly of pine and antiseptic. Rusty lay curled in the corner, smaller than he looked under the bandages. He was alert now, ears twitching at every sound, tail giving shy little thumps when Jonah entered the room. His eyes followed the boy like the moon follows the tide. Jonah, now a regular fixture at the clinic, sat cross-legged beside the pen with his sketchbook, drawing lopsided pictures of rockets, trees, and dogs that looked suspiciously like Rusty. Occasionally, he looked up and whispered to the puppy, "You're getting stronger." Claire passed through the hallway, watching the two quietly. She had just finished sterilizing instruments in preparation for the next day's surgery. Dr. Brenner was due to arrive in the morning. Her fingers tingled with both anticipation and dread. Orthopedic operations on small dogs were delicate work, and Rusty's legs were still dangerously fragile. The doorbell rang, shaking the stillness. May Holloway stepped inside, brushing snow off her coat. Her braid was soaked, and her face was red from the cold, but her eyes were burning with purpose. "I went to the Granger property," she said without ceremony. Claire stiffened. "Alone, I brought Deputy Lyle." May replied. "The new guy. Young jittery, but decent." May pulled out a folder and spread photos across the reception desk. There's a second shed, smaller, padlocked. Lyle cut it open. Claire looked down. The images showed the inside of a rotting wooden shed. One wall was clawed to splinters. A rusted food bowl sat in the corner. Mouldy straw. Chains. May tapped one photo. Bloodstains. Old. Dried. Mixed in with tiny paw prints. Claire's throat closed. He was kept there long enough to forget what light felt like. They both went quiet. He's only a puppy, Claire whispered. Barely 5 months. He should have been playing learning to fetch. Not that. May nodded, then added, We're filing for animal cruelty charges. Even if Granger's dead, whoever had Rusty last, this wasn't the doing of nature. This was man. Claire leaned over the counter and held onto it like the weight of it might hold her upright. She wasn't just tired, she was angry. Furious in the quiet, controlled way people become after too many wounds. Does Hank know? She asked. May shook her head. Not yet, but I think you should tell him. That evening, Hank Benson returned to the clinic. His long coat still dusted in snow. He moved slowly, his cane tapping softly as he approached Rusty's pen. Jonah looked up, nodded solemnly, and stood to let him kneel. Rusty wagged his tail twice and tried to stand. He made it halfway up on 3 legs, then flopped gently into Hank's lap. The old man chuckled, his voice thick with something between pride and grief. You remember me, huh? He whispered. Claire stepped into the room. We found where he was kept. Hank looked up slowly. For how long? Claire hesitated. It's hard to say, but long enough to change him. Hank ran a hand over the pup's head. He doesn't flinch anymore when I reach out. No, Claire said softly. Because of Jonah. Hank looked at the boy, quiet, attentive, small, and something passed between them that didn't need words. I'd like to take him home after the surgery, Hank said. If he makes it through. Jonah's face dropped. Claire noticed and waited a moment before saying, There's something else. Jonah's been everything to this pup. The only constant. The only safe thing. Hank looked at the boy again, then at the puppy nestled in his arms. I'm an old man, he said. My place is quiet. Big yard, sure. But no laughter. No crayons on the floor. Jonah watched him carefully, fingers gripping the hem of his hoodie. Hank's eyes softened. Maybe it's time someone else raised him. Someone smaller. Someone who already knows how to love. Jonah blinked. You mean, I can keep him? I mean, Hank said, smiling faintly. Maybe I keep both of you. Anna, who had just entered with a thermos of soup and a new blanket, paused at the door, surprised to hear Hank's words. She looked at Claire, who gave a single nod. We could live together, Hank said. On my land. There's room. I don't want to live alone, and I don't think any of us were meant to. Anna stood, frozen for a moment, then slowly stepped forward. That would be a big change, but maybe a good one, Claire added. Rusty yawned, his tiny pink tongue curling up, then nestled back against Hank's leg tail, still wagging gently. Chapter 5. A home. Shared a heart. Healed snow still blanketed Willow Creek. But by the time the new year approached, it was no longer a silent, lonely kind of snow. It shimmered under strings of lights that hung between porches. It clung to boots, tracking in and out of Hank Benson's property. Once a quiet plot of land, tucked behind the pines, now filled with hammering laughter and the sound of second chances being built from wood wire and warmth. The little cottage, only partially completed, stood beside Hank's farmhouse like a promise. Inside the old barn, workbenches had been cleared, fencing supplies sorted, and a space made cozy with hay bales and thick blankets. And in the middle of it all, Rusty, the golden retriever puppy, who had once barely clung to life, chased a tennis ball with one leg still splintered, and all the clumsy grace of a creature learning joy. He tripped over himself constantly, but he always got up. Jonah, bundled in a red jacket and oversized mittens, laughed every time. His cheeks were pink from the cold, eyes bright and focused only on Rusty. Sometimes he ran ahead in the snow, and the puppy scrambled after him, tail wagging like it held up the sky. Anna watched from the porch, with Claire beside her. The two women shared a quiet mug of cider, their breath fogging gently in the air. They didn't speak much, but there was a kind of conversation in their silences now. A rhythm, an understanding. He's different, Anna said softly, nodding toward Jonah. Claire glanced at the boy. They both are. Inside, Hank was measuring lengths of pine flooring for the new bedroom. He whistled softly to himself, something between a hymn and a tune only old men remember. He'd been moving slower lately, but with more purpose, with more light in his eyes. That morning, a letter had arrived. It was from Dr. Brenner, following up on Rusty's surgery. The procedure had gone beautifully, both legs, pinned and healing. The pup would have a slight limp for life, but nothing that would slow him down. Attached to the letter was a short note in Brenner's own hand. That boy and that dog saved each other. You gave them the ground to stand on. Keep building. And build they did. Neighbours had come together, donating everything from lumber to labour. Wade brought handmade toys and snacks for the crew. May dropped off fencing posts and one slightly too big doghouse painted blue. Even Jodie Flynn returned with her camera, capturing Rusty's first real run, and Jonah's open-mouthed laughter in a photograph that ended up framed in the clinic. One night, Anna tucked Jonah into bed, now a mattress on the floor of the new home's living room, and watched as Rusty curled tightly beside him, their bodies forming a mirror of trust. She kissed her son's forehead, whispered a blessing, and turned off the light. But before leaving the room, she heard Jonah whisper to Rusty, "You don't have to be scared anymore. We're both home now." Rusty yawned, nuzzled closer, and sighed, like all the weight in his tiny heart had finally found somewhere to rest. On New Year's Eve, they held a small gathering in Hank's yard. Snow still blanketed the earth, but a fire crackled in a ring of stones, and a few neighbors came bearing pie and hot cider. Strings of white lights ran from tree to tree, swaying gently in the night breeze. Jonah stood beside Rusty near the fire, one hand resting on the puppy's soft head, the other tucked in his coat pocket. Hank seated beside Claire, and Anna raised a mug. To second chances, he said. And to the ones who listen, Claire added, smiling at Jonah. Rusty let out a soft, contented bark, and everyone laughed. Later that night, after the fire had died to embers and the guests had gone home, Jonah curled beneath his new blanket, Rusty's body warm against his side. Snow fell outside in lazy spirals, but the house no longer felt cold. It felt like a place where hearts healed. It felt like home. Chapter 6. The Echo of Quiet Things. Epilogue. Phiên bản cập nhật Rusty là chó con Golden Retriever khoảng 5-6 tháng tuổi giờ đã lớn hơn một chút. Spring came quietly to Willow Creek. It didn't announce itself with fireworks or bright declarations. It crept in soft-footed and sure, melting the snow, one stubborn patch at a time, coaxing the buds to open one shy petal after another. The fields around Hank Benson's property turned from white to green, and with it the world felt new again, but not unfamiliar. Just restored. The cottage was finished now. Pale blue shutters framed the windows. A wooden porch wrapped around the front, where a wind chime made from old spoons clicked gently in the breeze. Beside it, a hand-painted sign read, Jonah and Rusty's Place, in big, uneven letters. Rusty no longer quite the tiny puppy he had been, but still awkward, with his oversized paws and youthful bounce, chased butterflies through the yard like they were part of some secret game. Only dogs understood. His golden coat, once matted and dull, now gleamed in the sun. The limp in his step remained a small hitch in his gait, but it didn't slow him down. If anything, it made him bounce harder, like he was daring the world to keep up. Inside, Jonah knelt by the window, watching Rusty with a soft smile. At nearly 7 now, his hair was longer, his shoulders a little squarer. He still didn't say much in crowds, but when he spoke to Rusty, his voice was strong, confident in a way only those who have been heard learn to speak. Come on, Rust, Jonah called through the open window. Rusty turned on a dime and bolted toward the house, ears flapping, tail wagging like it powered his little golden engine. He leapt up the stairs carefully. Claire's voice always reminded him gentle on the front legs, and plopped down at Jonah's feet with a thump and a groan that only half sounded like pain. Jonah ruffled his ears. You ready for the picnic? Rusty's tongue lolled in happy agreement. That afternoon they walked down to the meadow behind the house. Anna had packed a basket sandwiches, juice apples. Hank brought his harmonica, and though he only knew 3 songs, he played them like the whole world needed to hear them again. Claire stopped by on her lunch break, her lab coat tied around her waist, bringing a small envelope marked Rusty, final checkup, all clear. They didn't talk about the past much. It lived in photographs, in framed newspaper clippings, in the small scar near Rusty's hind leg. But they didn't need to say it. They were the proof of what came after. As the sun dipped low and the trees turned gold at the edges, Jonah rested back on the blanket Rusty curled against him, head on the boy's chest. I think he chose me first, Jonah said softly, to no one in particular. Anna, brushing crumbs from her skirt, smiled gently. I think he heard something no one else did. Maybe, Jonah whispered. Maybe we both did. Later, as the evening hush returned and shadows stretched longer across the meadow, Claire sat beside Hank on the porch swing. You ever think about how it all started? She asked. In a shed, Hank replied. In silence. Claire nodded. It's strange. You'd think a dog that small wouldn't stand a chance. He didn't, Hank said. Not until someone quiet enough to listen came along. Final reflection. Rusty was never the biggest, never the fastest, never the loudest. But he was brave. Brave enough to wait. Brave enough to trust. Brave enough to believe that somewhere, somehow, someone would hear the kind of cry that doesn't make a sound. And Jonah. He was never the boy who shouted the loudest in class. Never the one picked first for sports. But he listened. And that listening saved a life. Maybe two. Because sometimes the world doesn't need more noise. Sometimes it needs a quiet child, a broken dog, and the kind of love that shows up anyway.